Hello, Dr. Bhargav. Welcome to Asia. And now, if I have your permission, may we start?
Yes, sure.
All right.
Great to be here.
Yeah, interesting book and pretty big book. How long was the dissertation?
How long? It was 100,000 words because you're not allowed to write more than that. So,
Okay.
my plan was to keep it to that, but then to write it for the public, I kind of had to explain a few more things and wanted to make it also like a story. So it became a bit fat, plus the footnotes are also many.
The footnotes, the endnotes, they're pretty interesting. So before we begin, this is the book that this discussion, rather this conversation is around. I ordered the book, or rather I purchased the book early on from Bahari's. I think I missed you by a day or a day and a half while you were signing them at Bahari's, but I have a signed copy. Well, actually, with a little note. So that's good. I've seen a lot of interviews, a lot of expositions that you've done with media houses around the book in India. So most of those interviews are around trying to fit an argument in what is happening in politics right now. So I will not be going there. I'm going to stick to the book, but I'm also going to stick to what you often allude to Skinner's arguments about intellectual history. I'm much more interested in the intellectual world that shaped Lala Lajpat Rai. So this conversation is entirely going to be around that theme, that topic. And because we have only an hour to have this conversation, it's going to be it's going to be a jump cut and a jump cut and a jump cut, and kind of going to run through some of these issues that you've rigged up in the book. Before we get into the serious side of the conversation, explain the title. Interestingly, this is not being Indian, being Hindu. This is being Hindu, being Indian. And as I read the book, it becomes very apparent that both of these things were very important to him, but also they kept on changing in order of preference. So explain the title of the book. And while you do so, could you also give a 30,000-foot view of what the book is about?
Oh my God, I always find that very difficult. But with the title, for me, it's kind of my way of trying to use Lajpat Rai and this intellectual history as an entry point into exploring exactly these questions. During this period where he lived, what did it mean for him to be a Hindu? What did it mean for him to be an Indian? Through him trying to bring out the fact that there were different ways in which these two identities were being imagined, even during his lifetime by other people and by him at different points of time. So kind of bringing out the diversity of these two identities and the way that they are related to each other at different points in different ways, and how that changes. So just opening up that question, that's what the title I'm hoping does. So the priority of, why Hindu comes first and being Hindu is coming first, being Indian, to me, that's not a normative position that I'm taking as the author. It's just that, just those two identities and how they are being articulated together and in different ways by him.
As to the 30,000-foot view,
yeah. So basically, so I divide the book into 4 phases between 1880, the 1880s and 1928 when he died. So it's this intellectual journey in a way through his mind in a 40-year period, spanning a 40-year period. And through that, tracing how his ideas of nationhood are changing. So the first phase is kind of the beginning of this process, when Lajpat Rai is very young, a teenager almost, or in his early 20s. So it begins in the 1880s and ends in 1900. And this is the phase where his ideas of religion are developing. He's influenced by the Arya Samaj. So I kind of describe how his view of religion is influenced by the Arya Samaj. At the same time, the debate with the one-sided debate with Sir Syed Ahmed Khan is kind of I'm using that to take the reader into how he's basically articulating the nation when it comes to the context of representation and self-government. So this is when he's imagining an Indian nation. But at the same time, you see this conflict within him that he's starting to toy with the idea of a Hindu nation. And that's what starting to kind of be really fleshed out. Then we come to the second phase from 1900 to 1915. This phase is when he's articulating his most robust idea of Hindu nationalism. So 1909 and this is the speech to the Punjab Hindu Sabha, which is cited the most by scholars as evidence for, his proto-Hindu nationalism, or his being a precursor to Savarkarite Hindutva nationalism, which is just elaborated later by Savarkar and fleshed out later by Savarkar. So this is one speech which I use to kind of show the difference between his Hindu nationalism, the most full-bodied form of Hindu nationalism that he's articulating, and its difference also with Savarkar. The similarities, yes, but also the differences. And his move also towards radical caste reform as a way to also unify the Hindu nation and make a strong Hindu nation. So, bringing out that possibility that there is a Hindu nationalist, and there is also within that frame a very radical caste reform, that kind of approach to building the Hindu community. And then we come to the third phase, which is 1915 onwards, and this is where his thought starts to shift quite a bit and irreversibly, because so far he's actually using the term nation in the sense of a religio-cultural community. So this is what people often also get confused with, because the Hindu nationalist is often understood in the nationalist sense of the term, but actually his use of the word nation in the first phase is often equivalent to using like how people used to use the word "com." So a community. So therefore, in the previous two phases, even when he's talking about a Hindu nation, he's talking about a Hindu nation and a Muslim nation. So often people will be like, oh, this is like, the two-nation theory, the birth of the two-nation theory. But this is a very different kind of two-nation theory. This is not a talk of partition. This is not talk of two separate nation states. It is a multiple nations within a common British Indian state and an empire. And then in 1915, with this third phase, beginning 1915, he shifts to using the word nation only in the nationalist sense of the term, in the statist sense of the term. So when he's talking about nation, he's now imagining that every nation has to have a state of its own. And when he makes this shift, and this shift happens because of the First World War, because this whole logic of superior European nations ruling over supposedly inferior nations of Asia and Africa kind of starts to really crumble with the outbreak of the First World War. And with this, he starts to imagine nations as self-governing political formations. The world order is not an imperial world order, but he starts to imagine the very real possibility of there being another kind of world where you have equal self-governing nations. And when he makes this shift from using the term nation in the pre-nationalist sense to refer only to a cultural community to the nationalist, fully nationalist statist sense of the term, to refer to a cultural community which must have a state of its own and must be self-governing, then he makes another shift of seeing the nation only as the Indian nation. So there's one nation in India, not multiple nations like what he used to see before. And this is the Indian nation. And then he starts to, and then there are different factors which kind of lead him to imagine Hindus and Muslims and other communities here as one common Indian nation. And one is his milieu in America. One is his distance from America, from India also, a global lens, which, exposes him to a different milieu and also makes him view Hindus and Muslims. The differences between them is less significant. But more importantly, I argue that the change is also because the shift that is happening in the political orientation of the Muslim League. So the Muslim League this time, the young leadership in India, the younger Muslim leaders are beginning to question the the old policy of the Muslim League of loyalism towards the British and distance from the Congress, and because of certain policies that are happening, that are being instituted by the British in India and towards the Ottoman Empire and Ottoman Caliphate. There's a sense of embitterment and disgruntlement among the younger Muslim leadership. And this makes them now shift towards the Congress and towards this idea of greater political cooperation with the Congress and with Hindus. And Lajpat Rai is responding to that also. So now he's really able to imagine that you can have a common Indian nationhood, which is upheld by both Hindus and Muslims. And another factor is also, again, the First World War, where he's now, the main priority becomes that Hindus and Muslims have, instead of fighting with each other, we need to really unite as Indians and unite with other Asian countries and lead an Asian struggle to smash this European imperial world order, which is illegitimate, cruel, exploitative. So he kind of starts to think this competitive communal way of thinking within India that, is very narrow. These are my interests, these are that community's interests, and we need to fight each other. It's more about transcending this fight and uniting together as Indians and having this global struggle for a more just world order. And this has in terms of the texture, I'm sorry if I'm speaking too much actually. Now, I don't want such an elaborate. But in terms of the texture of his nationalism, you see the change in a few ways. So one idea was that in one of his books, The Problem of National Education in India, he articulates the idea that Hindus and Muslims are a common mixed race, an Aryan-Mongolian mixed race. So he completely dismisses the idea of them being separate races and there being any conflict within them based on this, and articulates the idea that, Hindus are descendants of Aryans, but they have a lot of Mongolian blood in them. Muslims have a lot of Aryan blood in them. This question is irrelevant, and we are one mixed race. Similarly, with national culture, he starts to talk about, Hindu and Muslim festivals are both national festivals. They both have to be celebrated as national festivals. And in terms of national icons, we can be proud of Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, we can be proud of Tagore. So, a kind of more pluralist public culture is imagined by him as very important for nation building and making Hindus and Muslims realize that they're part of a common Indian nationhood. And he talks about Akbar as this great leader who, within his personality, combined the best elements of Hinduism and Islam. And this is what India should also do. And then then he kind of reinterprets the medieval period of India's history. And this I find quite interesting, that he kind of looks back at history and emphasizes peaceful coexistence between Hindus and Muslims. So, firstly, indigenizes Muslim rule by very forthrightly arguing that it is not right to say that it's foreign rule. The rulers may have been foreign in their origin, but ultimately they made India their home and they became sons of soil. They married there, they had children there, they died there, they contributed to the culture here. Hindustani or Urdu is a language which is purely Indian, to which they contributed. And he kind of also questions this whole idea that Muslim rule was a period of violence and oppression upon Hindus. Or that there was any attempt by these rulers to outcast Hinduism or make it illegal. So he kind of questions these tropes which have become common in certain strands of nationalist history writing. So also through this, I'm kind of questioning this idea of Lajpat Rai as the Savarkar, forefather of Hindutva, forefather of Savarkar. These are very different ideas from what Savarkar was beginning to conceptualize during this period. And then he comes back to India, and the Khilafat movement is in full flow, and he supports the Khilafat movement. Again, something which is very counterintuitive to what we would imagine about Lajpat Rai, who is, birthed the idea of Hindu nationalism or was part of the Hindu Mahasabha. He's supporting the Khilafat movement because to him now, Hindu-Muslim unity is a the foundation of Indian Swaraj, and also a moral and political principle in its own right. For him, it's become important for the identity of the Indian nation and the autonomy and freedom of the Indian nation also. So, because now this principle has become important, he's asking Hindus to repose their faith in Muslims and sympathize with the Muslim grievance of what the European powers may do to the, and eventually do to the Ottoman Caliphate Empire, which is to break it up, divide it up between themselves, reduce the power of the Ottoman Empire, and also, according to a lot of the Muslim leaders this time, and Gandhi and Lajpat Rai both, this was also was preventing Muslims from fulfilling their religious obligations, the dismantling of the Khilafat, and taking away the power of the custody, taking away the holy cities of Islam from the caliph's custody, and taking away basically state power from the caliph. So yeah, then this 14-month movement of the Khilafat non-cooperation movement, Lajpat Rai gives a lot of reasons for why Hindus should support the Khilafat movement, even if it's not their own cause, for the sake of supporting their Muslim brothers. We can go into details later. But and then in the fourth phase, so this phase continues till 1921-22, and then 2023 is kind of an in-betweener kind of year, but 24 is really the period where I would say the fourth phase of Lajpat Rai's political and intellectual life starts. So 1924 to 1928, the fourth phase, where he's joining the Hindu Mahasabha and again shifting his ideas in response to changing political context. And the changed political context is one where there is the disintegration of the Khilafat movement, a lot of distrust developing within the leaders that were acting together and unitedly, and also on the popular plane, riots happening at an unprecedented level, a communal polarization and competitive kind of, this Shuddhi Sangathan on one hand, Tanzim Tabligh on the other hand. So the whole atmosphere, and plus there's government repression, demoralization is setting in, and the Lucknow Pact, which had also been agreed upon by the Congress and the Muslim League, is also being kind of falling apart a little bit. And on top of this, 1919 Montagu-Chelmsford reforms has unleashed a totally different kind of politics in India. So there is provincialization of politics and the shift of the political center from urban nationalist confrontation with the British towards this kind of rural loyalism. So in the provinces, the center of politics is shifted to the provinces from the all India kind of politics and gone into the rural loyalist kind of leaders, and new leaders are coming up which are challenging the old leaders. So there's a sense of confusion and fragmentation, there's violence, there's polarization. And then there's the Kohat riot that happens in the Northwest Frontier province, which is a Muslim majority province. And here a complicated series of events leads to this riot, and the British government evacuates the Hindu minority out of Kohat. And this event really does have a very stark and palpable effect on Lajpat Rai and his politics again, where he kind of goes into the Hindu Mahasabha and sees the organization of a Hindu politics is very important and urgent. And the other, so one is violence and the Tabligh movement, which is seen as the reason for why Hindus need to consolidate. And the other thing is the sense that the Muslim League is articulating another kind of politics, which is focused on getting Muslims, articulating a common Muslim position. Although this can also be qualified a lot because there was a lot of fragmentation within Muslim politics even now. This was a very tenuous kind of demand that they had also made, but there was some kind of a common demand. One can say that from the outside, it was looking like a one Muslim position, and they were demanding separate electorates, insisting on that, and also a level of Muslim representation more than their numbers and more than what had been agreed upon in the Lucknow Pact. And this leads Lajpat Rai to believe that within the Hindus need to also articulate a Hindu politics through the Hindu Mahasabha. And then there's this whole thing of, Hindu Sangathan, Hindu politics, and there needs to be for the purpose of a pact, a political pact with Muslims, which is fair to both communities. So this is his kind of politics within the 1920s. But what I also argue is that this Hindu politics is being articulated alongside vision for an India which is a secular vision. So a vision of secularism. So the nation that he's imagining is not a Hindu nation. It's not Hindutva that he's championing. There's no dreams of Hindu cultural or political supremacy or a state that would privilege Hinduism or Hindus. He's imagining in the future a secular Indian nation state, where the state is separated from religion, and there's religious freedom for all, and there's equal citizenship irrespective of religion. There's also Muslim reservations, which he considers, but in proportion to their numbers. So a complicated journey that I'm trying to map through this person, and a complicated journey not just of an individual, but of nationalism. I'm sorry if
No, absolutely. Fascinating.
Yeah.
It's very hard to kind of condense a 400-page book in 30,000-foot view, but it was important because there are many. Lala Lajpat Rai is a very interesting figure, but he's also a contrarian and a very contradictory or a self-contradictory figure. So let's jump into it. When your book opens up, your book opens up about this family being supplanted in Punjab from a different part of the country. And then Lala Lajpat Rai, he's not a lawyer to begin with. He starts off as a lower pleader, and then he becomes a lawyer. Do you think this particular mobility had some sort of gave him some sort of need to contradict people who were born into, say, families that ensured that they became lawyers straight away? Because we see time in and time out, at the time that he was coming up, he becomes part of the Hisar Congress, but then he's also part of the Anglo-Vedic movement that is happening. So he becomes he becomes a spokesperson for two very, very different organizations at the same time. Tell us a little bit about what were the intellectual forces shaping his ideas at that point of time, because it could have gone either way. He could have become part of a religious movement or a pseudo-religious movement, but he puts his foot firmly in both the camps. What were the forces shaping him?
I mean, I think the Arya Samaj is clearly a very strong force in Punjab, which is shaping Lajpat Rai. So,
Arya Samaj also, because he has a lot of influence of the predecessors of the Arya Samaj, the Brahmo Samaj. So Brahmo Samaj is also something that keeps on coming in. So you have the Brahmo Samaj, you have the Arya Samaj, then you have a lot of political activism that is happening up. He's setting up the Hisar Bar Council at that point of time, if I'm not wrong.
I'm not sure, but I think he's working as a vakil in Hisar, but I'm not sure if he's setting up the Bar Council.
He's part of the team that is setting it up, I think.
Okay. I mean, my focus has mostly been on ideas and on, religion and nationhood. That is the focus of the whole book. So I'm not sure about this particular, the lawyer question that you're asking. But yeah, in terms of forces and intellectual forces, which are, broader forces which are shaping his thought, clearly Arya Samaj is shaping a lot of Punjabi Hindus at this time. And also before this, the Brahmo Samaj. But there are certain overlaps between those two ideologies, those two organizations also, and their ideas, anti-idol worship, anti-polytheism, this kind of acceptance of the critique that British colonial officers and missionaries are making of Hinduism, the contemporary Hinduism of this time, is accepted by a lot of people. And the reformist organizations like the Brahmo Samaj and the Arya Samaj are kind of imbibing this critique and also offering a counter to it by saying that, contemporary Hinduism, yes, is corrupted or has deteriorated or is in disarray. But in the past, we had this monotheism, this one God, this religion that did not believe in idol worship, and this kind of what was considered backward at that time. So these ideas and these reformist ideas of one within the Arya Samaj, one text, the Vedas. Other texts are false and human creations. No idol worship, no temple going, no avatars, because that is also human form. God is formless. And no horoscopes, no excessive ritualism, no excessive ceremonies. This kind of very radical reformism definitely shapes Lajpat Rai, both in his very brief Brahmo Samaj phase and then his association with the Arya Samaj, which is a much more deeper connection. Politically, so yeah, I think in his head he's kind of compartmentalizing like a social cultural domain where all of this is happening, but of course ideas of nationhood are coming there also, and this political domain, which is the domain of what he considers pure politics, and that is where his support for the Congress is coming up, and this idea that when you're talking about self-government, and these are very nascent ideas right now because empire is an entrenched reality in the 1880s, when he's even arguing what the Congress is asking for is within the empire, within the imperial legislative councils, half seats which are elected, and within that also a franchise which is elected, but elected. It's asking for elected representation, but a very narrow franchise still. So just not races like Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, but also middle class, propertied people like people who are in the Congress, basically. So these are this idea of a new kind of Indian nationalism where a nation is imagined as a cultural community, a political community of people, however diverse it is, of who has a common political concerns and a common political future. This idea is being born. And on the other hand, this religious domain where Arya Samaj is influencing a lot. And sometimes he's able to keep it quite separate. Sometimes it's coming together. So that's also what you see in the book.
So you draw the long feud between, well, one-sided, as you just pointed out, between Sir Syed Ahmed Khan and Lala Lajpat Rai. Once you get into the granularities of this, essentially the argument is twofold. One, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan has some ideas about why democracy is not good, and second, we need to maintain a distance from the Indian National Congress, which is just coming up. Now, Lala Lajpat Rai is giving this long argument in support of the Congress. And at this point of time, as you just said, and this is coming out very clearly in the book, the ideas of nationhood come out. But what I'm interested in finding out, where are these ideas of nationhood coming from? Because for somebody who is in a part of Punjab, who as of now does not have a wider social reach, he's literally in conversation with people he has known all his life. There is some people are beginning to recognize him, but the ideas that he's toying around with, what was the spark? What kind of got him onto this idea of thinking about nationhood? Because it's a complicated assignment to go
on. You're saying as part of the debate with Sir Syed?
But also,
generally,
where are the ideas about nationhood coming from? Because Sir Syed Ahmed's ideas about nationhood, comity, are very well developed, they're very well argued, they're coming from a particular place and a sense of time and history.
Yeah.
Lala Lajpat Rai in this can be called as an upstart, right? He's trying to present a picture which is completely different from what Sir Syed Ahmed Khan is talking about. Where is this picture in his head coming from? This idea about a nation, a country.
Yeah. So so Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, I'll just give a little brief overview of his idea of nationhood. So his use of the word nation is a pre-nationalist sense of the word nation. So he's using it in a very kind of to mean cultural communities, communities of descent. So when he's talking about Hindus and Muslims, he's talking about two different nations. And sometimes he's talking about an Indian Qawm also. So there are two nations within a larger Indian territorial community of which they form a part. Sometimes Bengalis also are also a separate nation. So for him, this idea is he's really from a different generation.
He's
Born
basically talking
in
about pre-1857 nationhood, right? He's talking about
yes, exactly.
have access to, let's keep the status quo. That's
Yeah, and even, I mean, Eric Hobsbawm, I think he said that till 1884, or till the 1880s, the word nation is largely used in this Syed kind of sense of, this is nation as a community of descent or stock or a cultural community. The idea of it being linked to this community having common political concerns or common political interests or a common political future which they have to shape, or that this community has to have a territory of its own over which it must have a state of its own and be self-ruling is really not there in this period. And Sir Syed really belongs to that period. And 1817 is when he was born, and Lajpat Rai is 1865. So this is like 50 years of a generation gap between them, basically. And you can really see the shift in how the idea of nationhood is being used and understood in these two figures very, very differently through this debate. And it really comes out because Lajpat Rai has moved, he's in an era where the Congress is being formed. And the Congress is the symbol of that much more clearer crystallization of the new nationalist idea of the nation, where a nation is a cultural community and a political community which must have a state of its own and must be self-ruling at least in the future. So, of course, these are complicated ideas in intellectual history. It can't be very neat because even now, empire is taken for granted, even by the Congress. Most congressmen are taking empire completely for granted. This is how the world is organized. But this idea has started to come that every nation must have a state of its own and be self-ruling in the future, however distant it may be. And Lajpat Rai is shaped by this discourse, of which Congress is a very clear kind of reflection of this new discourse that's born. So I think the Congress and Lajpat Rai are kind of shaped by this new idea of nationhood. They are working with similar ideas. And Congress must have, by virtue of its formation, is also making this idea much more popular, which is probably also shaping Lajpat Rai. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. I mean, one of the things is fascinating about the book is perhaps it could be another book. I don't know if you want to work on Lala Lajpat Rai anymore, but what are the books that he reads during this process? Because, in the 4 phases that you divide the book in, you can actually see a sea of change in the character and the temperament of Lala Lajpat Rai. However, moving on, tell us a little bit about the linguistic politics that's going around in this time in Punjab. You have some people who are trying to break away from Urdu. And keep in mind or bear in mind that till 1956, Urdu is the most important language in Punjab, right? You transact all your government business in it. It's the language of the elite. And Lala Lajpat Rai cuts out quite a dashing figure in trying to get away from the grasp of Urdu. However, he is very well versed in the language. So, what is his position on this language debate?
So this is also not something I go into very deeply, but it comes across in his first phase where he's just joined the Arya Samaj, and the Arya Samaj is also leading the Hindi movement, and promotion of Hindi is part of the Arya Samaj's,
But
program.
it's not Hindi really, because it's a version of Hindi of Bharatendu Harish Chandra. So, but that's not really Hindi. It's still very much in its nascent stages. So there's not really a patron-client relationship for Hindi as such. It's a very embryonic language. Let's put it like that.
And would you say that is different from Hindustani though? Oh, right?
In early form, nobody quite understands what was going on in that language. If you read Bharatendu Harish Chandra in the original, it's very hard. Even for somebody like me, I can read Hindi very, very well,
Yeah.
but I do not know what to make of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's something which is obviously seen as distinct. The assertion of it as distinct from Urdu is becoming important in this phase, right? And this is becoming part of this new cultural assertion that the Arya Samaj is also a part of. That, this vision of history also, where there is a sense that there is a Hindu history that needs to be taught, and the ancient Indian period needs to be talked about, and also the Hindu culture, and Hindi and Sanskrit is part of that Hindu culture. So this is part of the DAV education which the Arya Samaj is also promoting. And yeah, I mean, this is actually all I have in the book about this. So there's no deeper kind of exploration of this part of Lajpat Rai's life, and his position. But he's someone who is an Urdu speaker, writes in Urdu, but is in terms of his position on this Hindi Urdu question, he's taking a very clear stance, even if he cannot read or write the Hindi script or yeah.
Right. So then let's jump into the next phase that he gets into. That's his educationist phase. And I think in a lot of conversations you've had, it is fascinating because when you think about Lala Lajpat Rai today, you remember him for all the organizations that he founded. You know, all the DAVs, all the National College in Lahore, which then you have Bhagat Singh and others coming out of it. Tell us a little bit about evolution of Lala Lajpat Rai as a proto politician slash educationist.
Yeah, so this I've written about in, I think, the first phase of his book, where he's really involved in the foundation of the DAV school, the DAV college. So this is the Dayanand Anglo-Vedic college, and he's very
He writes
closely.
a book about it as well. He writes a book about what kind of education we should be imparting.
Oh, the problem of that one that comes later. Yeah. So in the beginning, it's really this idea that one has to provide an education which is correcting the lopsided education that is provided by the colonial government. Although, uh, I mean, there was a neglect of certain indigenous knowledges under colonial education, but Lajpat Rai also actually praised English education and English liberal education precisely because it was also teaching the history of India. He talks about how English education is very important precisely because it is through English education that Hindus have realized that what they used to be in the past, so the knowledge of ancient India, and from where they have fallen now today. So he kind of buys this idea of decline. That's a separate question, but he also appreciates English education. And against the Gurukul Arya Samajis, he's insistent that English education is very important. So we must not, the priority should not be a rigorous religious education at the cost of English education. So Anglo-Vedic, both. And then the Vedic part of it is, I'm arguing, theology and religion is not the priority for someone like Lajpat Rai or perhaps his college party associates also. For him, Dayanand Anglo-Vedic education, which is the Vedic education, it is more about Hindu history, the history of the Hindu community, and Hindi literature, the Sanskrit language, and this being aspects of what he considers Hindu culture. So this is he's seeing this as a kind of counter to the colonial education, although he appreciates aspects of it also. So it's kind of cultural assertion. And linked to the project of awakening pride in the Hindu community at a time when the colonial context is, I mean, colonial humiliation is also part of the context, and this feeling of inferiority and subjugation is also part of the context. And then later, I look at in the third phase, what the book that you mentioned, The Problem of National Education, where he's really imagining a different type of education where the aim of it has to be to make children realize that you are Indians first and last. So in all economic and political matters, you are Indians. So kind of really moving away from that earlier idea of this religious nationalism or like we are different religious nationalities. He's written a book called on the Arya Samaj a few years before this book on national education, and he said he kind of reminds the Arya Samaj that you have to realize that India today is not exclusively Hindu, and this Hinduism has to be reconciled with a greater ism, which is Indian nationalism. And this book, The Problem of National Education, really kind of uh, takes that forward seriously, where he's trying to imagine an education which makes Indian citizens out of Hindus, Muslims, Christians, and a lot of his ideas of kind of Hindus and Muslims are a common mixed race. We should have a pluralist public culture. And also our history needs to be written in a way that brings Indians together rather than pulls them apart. These ideas are coming in this book.
Right.
In 19.
So, because we have a paucity of time and we'll be now, as I said, jump cutting into a different thing altogether. But at this point of time, he is also a prolific writer. He writes quite a lot, and one of the things that he does is he translates the biography of Manzini from into one of the Indian languages, and he's very infatuated with this Italian reunification. What are the political lessons he's drawing from Western Europe, and how do these lessons end up shaping him as a politician? Because by this time, he's an established politician. He's no longer an upstart. He has his own ideas, he has his own position, and people are listening to him. So tell us a little bit about his intellectual awakening and kind of getting into a broader spectrum of serious political writing and literature.
So he is someone who's consistently reading quite seriously different histories of India through European writers. His ideas of Indian history also shaped by these writers, shaped but also a response to often. Western Europe, I would say mostly it comes across as this belief that has come into India through colonial discourses, basically, that this critique of Hinduism he takes quite seriously. To me, in the early period, that's really the main influence that one sees of European kind of ideas, is that this critique of Hinduism as a religion which is in disarray, disunited, too complicated and chaotic, messy, not organized. And Hindus, because of this, have an inability to either unite or to also rule themselves. He takes this idea very seriously, and his response as an Arya Samaji, and later as someone who's also articulating a Hindu nationalism, is a response to these Western kind of European ideas which he's encountering. One could have had obviously different kind of response to it by dismissing them or just accepting that Hinduism is a different religion. It's not the same as Christianity or other Abrahamic religions. It's a different, distinct religion. But Lajpat Rai, like many other Hindus of his time, is accepting this critique and then kind of offering a defense from within this acceptance in a way. That Hindus are a nation. Hindus were once united in the past because they followed a monotheistic religion like Christianity. Hinduism and the Vedas had a concept of monotheism, which was, superior or like as good as one finds in the Quran or the Bible. So it's this kind of an argument that's being made by Lajpat Rai. And he really accepts that in the political domain, the West is really superior in terms of statecraft. So in the spiritual domain, maybe, in the past, there was superiority of the Vedas, but now today, power lies with the West, and that has to be imbibed and learned. This kind of, in the political domain, the West is superior, basically. And later, the model that he also, in the 20s, he's kind of again turning back to the West as a model for secularism. So in this disarray in the 1920s, where there is a feeling of, again, everything is kind of fragmented, there's violence, there's disunity. What he's arguing for really is a secular nation state, and he really articulates this very strong idea that India has to follow America and the West. America and Europe, and basically the West, and how they've kept religion and the state separate. That is what India needs to do if it wants to kind of follow, to rise up economically and be guided only not by something backward like religion, but something economic. And, kind of the Europe's ascendancy in the world, its global ascendancy, and America's, is because it followed the secular vision, and India has to do the same. So these are, to me, coming up as like two main things that he's influenced through in the trajectory of his life, the influence of the West. But I think, there obviously there are ideas which are influencing him throughout his life, and some of them are from India, some of them are from the West. But I think that is also a different kind of intellectual history, where the influences are constantly kind of, you're very conscious of like which ideas are coming from where. Which is not, my book was kind of more about intellectual history in the sense of really focusing on the texture of the ideas. So what is really going on? What are the nuances? What are the textures? And what is the meaning ultimately? What is the implication of this texture?
No, right, absolutely. But the reason this becomes important is because at this point of time, he's also part of a triumvirate, right? The Lal Bal Pal thing that,
Yeah.
I mean, go back, and this is a time, these 20 years, when these people are at the center stage from 1905 to broadly 1920, 21. They are at the center stage, and then slowly and steadily, it's the rise of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi that eclipses kind of their prevalence. So, what, in terms of his political activities at this point of time, in your book, you have a very clear delineation about, what is it that he demands. But why don't you now tell us about how is he looking at the idea of governance, self-governance, because at this point of time, these are the things that he's grappling with. How is he looking at them, and how is he trying to fit them within a larger, broader social progress program also that he's trying to run?
So in the Swadeshi period, 1905 to 1908, mostly it is when the extremists are kind of, in my understanding, they're actually kind of on the margins of the Congress, really. And
but coming to the center.
They were actually ousted from the Congress after the Surat Pact the Surat split in 1907. So they are the Congress moderates really kind of have the control over the Congress, and also there's government repression after the Swadeshi movement. So the unity within the Congress is kind of lost, and the extremists are really kind of clamped down upon. And this period is really one where the moderates control the Congress, but also there is total disillusionment and because of the government repression after the Swadeshi movement. And Tilak is actually in jail, I think, from 1908 to 1914, right? So Aurobindo Ghosh is also Alipur bomb case. He kind of then goes to Pondicherry after a few years. So, but Lajpat Rai is deported, but is back, and his vision of self-government, really, he doesn't have a vision yet. In this early period when empire is so strong, it's more about the nation and its vision. So the vision of the nation, what is the nation? That is really the question in the early phases, which he's grappling with. Are Hindus a separate nation, or are they an Indian nation along with the other religious communities? This is mainly the question of politics and self-rule when that comes up. So it comes up during the separate electorates controversy, 1908, 1909. Then he's kind of very clearly talking about an Indian nation, and he's talking about the logic of numbers. And so again, separate electorates, because that will divide the nation permanently. And any demand which is a claim upon representation, which asks for representation in excess of numbers, is rejected by Lajpat Rai. So he's really kind of held on to the new democratic logic which is coming in, which is a numerical logic that of one man, one vote. Every person is equal, so basically complete formal political equality, but also with some always desire to also empathize as much as you can with whoever will become the minority community. So in the first two phases, it's the nation that is really like the conflict within him is about what is the national community. How do you define the nation? Is there one nation here, or two, or many? And later, then it becomes the idea of nation becomes much more clear for him. Indian nation. This is what everybody within here, the religious communities are all part of one Indian nation. And this nation is then now he's focusing on the state. Towards the last phase is actually where he really grapples with the question of this vision of what sort of a self-governing state and India will we have. And the answer to that question is always for him a secular Indian nation state where religion and state is kept separate. There are no religious purposes or institutions for which government funds will be used. There's no undue preference for any one religion, and there's complete religious freedom for everyone and equal citizenship. Also, religion is not a question when you come to defining citizenship. So everyone that was born in India, or whose parents were born in India, or who's made India his or her home, is an Indian citizen. And this is really the vision of a self-governing India that he's thinking about ultimately, and also a federal India. So a federal India where the different provinces also have autonomy. So here, Muslim cultural autonomy also comes in because there's Punjab, Bengal, Northwest Frontier Province. Also, ultimately, he's imagining Baluchistan and Sindh also by 1927-28 as separate provinces. So a vision which is trying to also be fair to other religious communities that exist in India alongside Hindus.
And then just after this, when they are on the margins, 1908, 1909, you have the Monumental Reforms. And in the Monumental Reforms, a lot of the ideas that he's been grappling with, they suddenly have a definite form and a shape. So A, how does he react to the Monumental Reforms? And B, by 1909, he's become one of the biggest leaders in northern India. He's somebody that people are reaching out to. They want to seek his opinion. But how is he mobilizing people? Because he has a very unique way of mobilizing people, which is very different from what the other political heavyweights at this point of time were doing. So essentially, two questions.
I think I got the first one, so I'll start with that, and then you can tell me the second one again. But 1909, the separate electorates controversy, he is not happy with the fact that the British have granted separate electorates to Muslims. He thinks this is divisive. He thinks it will permanently compartmentalize Hindus and Muslims into two separate political communities. It will prevent the evolution of a common Indian nationhood. And his response really is to join the Punjab Hindu Sabha. And this is when he gives his most robust articulation of a Hindu nation. So even though just a year ago or even a few months ago, he was talking about an Indian nation, as a response to the separate electorates which were granted, he really shifts towards articulating this very robust Hindu nationalism that Hindus are a nation on their own, a separate nation, and and then he tries to include, and this is also the most capacious Hindu nation that he defines. So he's bringing in even Sikhs and Buddhists and Jains, and this is his most strident claim on a majority, also on a Hindu national cultural majority in some ways. So he's talking about how Sikhs and Buddhists and Jains might follow a separate religion, but they should be part of the Hindu nation because they follow a Hindu culture. Now, what Sikhs might actually think, and many Sikhs would disagree, is a separate question, but this was his most robust articulation of a Hindu nation. Although by this time, he's also saying that more clearly than before, that this Hindu nation is the strengthening of the Hindu nation and the Muslim nation is the path towards forming an eventual broader Indian nation. That is definitely the goal. But his way of reaching that goal, which some might consider counterintuitive, is to build a Hindu nation and a strong Muslim nation. And then the Indian nation will come eventually out of this. This is very different from what he then moves on to. He really starts to eventually see this as a totally counterproductive thing also. You can't strengthen religious nationalities and then expect an Indian nationality to come out of it. In the later phase, in the third and fourth phase, he really is talking about transcending religious community to arrive at an Indian national identity, not strengthening it politically. And then, so and also the other response is also this in 1909, after the separate electorates are conceded, the shift towards a very radical caste reformist politics. So caste radicalism as a way also to unify Hindus and the Hindu nation, which he's using in the sense of a community. But so this move towards a very radically challenging caste hierarchy. That's the other move that he makes.
Okay, so the other question that I was asking you, as a political leader, one of the things that you have to do is you have to consistently get people to be on your side, mobilize your people to be there, to be behind you. And Lala Lajpat Rai has, by this time, a very distinctive way of mobilizing people. So in Punjab, you have the Sikh sort of a cold shoulder to a lot of the things that are happening in the Congress. Then you have the Muslim agitation that is also happening in and around Punjab. How is Lala Lajpat Rai mobilizing people around these ideas? Because as you map out, he has distinctive phases. So how is he able to get people on his side? Are these the same people, or is he getting hold of different groups at different times?
I think he's trying to shape the same groups, I think, but his politics is shifting. And in the early phase, it's really about kind of opposing the Congress moderate mode of politics, which is petitioning, passing resolutions, challenging the British through the legislative councils, not being too confrontational, because that might be a problem and might backfire. That's the Congress moderate mode of politics. Lajpat Rai is really with Tilak and Aurobindo Ghosh, who really who sees this as kind of not effective anymore, and you need to kind of get on the ground. A more agitational mode of politics is needed. Masses need to be brought in, and the kind of democratic age is one of equality. So kind of also this new, like just subalterns in a way need to be included into this mode of politics. But he sometimes is also not entirely comfortable with that. He has fears also of this kind of mass politics losing control. And going beyond the intentions of its leaders. So there are those anxieties that also come up during the 1907 rural agitation in Punjab, because of which he's deported to Burma with Bhagat Singh's uncle. So Bhagat Singh's uncle, Ajit Singh, is much more radical, and Lajpat Rai is a little less. So it's nuanced there also. And then in the non-cooperation movement, again, he's kind of mobilizing people so this 1907 was this rural agitational politics, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, all, united. And then non-cooperation movement is kind of this Gandhian mass politics, non-violent, and for the, this whole Khilafat movement, and again, anti-imperial very strongly. And then again in the 1920s also is mobilizational politics. So it's Hindu Sangathan now. So that is a different kind of politics where there is an emphasis on Hindus need to come together. Hindus need to come together because in the future, he sees this as a mode of self-defense also. So there is actually here there's militancy also, and there's a permission given for violence in self-defense also. So this kind of communal mobilization is happening in the 1920s, very different from the Khilafat phase, where the mobilization is towards unity between Hindus and Muslims and anti-imperialism. Now anti-imperialism is kind of given a little bit of a, it's gone into the background because the more urgent thing is Hindu mobilization, Hindu Sangathan for a fair, what he imagines it will be a kind of limiting Muslim politics and guarding Hindu interests, both socially in terms of violence, but also politically, to make sure that the constitution that is agreed to is fair. Of course, like I argue that this is also a very counterproductive way of trying to realize a secular Indian nation state, because you are also, through this communal mobilization, there is polarization that is happening. And the Indian nation, if that was your aim, is actually also getting fragmented or torn apart, because it's creating mistrust, it's creating polarization, estrangement, and possibly even violence. So the means is counterproductive to the end of secular.
Absolutely. The contours of the entire of India that he imagines, they keep on changing. It's one of the things that one takes away from this remarkable book. Okay, so we have hit the hour mark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of ask you last two questions. So tell me a little bit about his foreign travels, because here is a person, and this is something that I did not get in your book, and I'm no historian. I'm an economist, so as far away from it as is humanly possible. But was Lala Lajpat Rai a reformer in the sense that he had um, an understanding of the power structure within Hinduism, something that he kind of started getting people around and he wanted to reform it up? Or was he somebody who agreed with Syed Ahmed Khan that there are broadly rulers and the ruled, and there is no need for social opening up? That's one part of the question. The second is he goes abroad. He goes to the United States. He goes to Europe. By the time 1920s rolled around, he's a pretty well-traveled person. And he goes to the United States where he meets the reformers, the Booker T. Washington and others. And he also writes, I think in one night, a 32-page pamphlet, which the United States Senate discusses. I think it was the Senate. I'm going by memory on this one. And he makes a case about caste being the same as color segregation in the United States. What's going on here?
Sorry, can you just remind me of your first question again? Whether he wants a social
Was he
opening?
a social reformer, or did he think that the ideas of Hinduism, that the different movements that he has been part of, so there is no real room for improvement of people who are, say, belonging to the lower classes in the Hindu structure?
Yeah, I mean, to that, I would say that, I mean, he is actually clearly a social reformer in the sense, well, first a religious reformer, because Arya Samaj is a reformist organization. So it's kind of, the whole idea is that Hinduism today has declined from its pure, uncorrupted form in the past, and we need to go back to what it was. So often it's seen as revival, but there's a lot of reform in this. So contemporary Hinduism needs to be reformed to take it back to its past. And there's a lot of invention also happening in what is being defined as original Hinduism. And a lot of what is seen as the limitations of people who are colonized are also tried, that is what is desired to be compensated, if that makes any sense. Like, all the features that are lacking today are shown to be present in the past. And then you go back to the past and you become, regenerated Hindus or Indians. So that is the reformist, Arya Samaji reformist.
If I may, Dr.
Yeah.
I get the argument. I also, while I was reading your book, I was also trying to find out the list of prominent Arya Samajis from the time that till 1928, for example. It talks a good game of opening it up, but just about everybody who was privileged was part of it, or people who wanted to be in privilege. People who were really underprivileged, they were not within the fold of Arya Samaj. So how do you kind of...
So actually 1900 onwards, there is a shift in this also. And like, so for Lajpat Rai, 1909 to 1915, that's the period where his caste reform is most radical. So he's talking about really challenging ideas of the notion of a Brahmin by birth. So hereditary caste is being challenged, that there's no such thing as you're born a superior person because you were born into a Brahmin family. Everybody has the right to read the Vedas. We don't need Brahmin specialists. Shuddhi. And now a lot of scholars initially used to see this as a very patronizing concept also, that the upper castes will come and purify lower castes. But recently, C.S. Adcock, who's a religious studies scholar, has also talked about how giving the sacred thread did entail a dissolution of caste status, lower caste status, and kind of this very overt acceptance of the lower caste into caste Hindu society, which had a very meaningful effect also. So not just a nominal change in their status. And Lajpat Rai also talks about the need for Shuddhi, but also the need for educating lower castes and untouchables, so-called untouchables, because this is the way that they will kind of get rid of upper caste, challenge upper caste arrogance and brutality and cruelty. So the need for them to be educated so that they have their own leaders who can challenge the caste system is really emphasized. And Lajpat Rai kind of compares upper castes to slave owners, and this kind of very strong criticism of upper caste treatment of lower castes. And he talks about also intercaste marriages. Intercaste marriage taboos and intercaste dining taboos. All these taboos are an invention. So he kind of tries to really delegitimize these kind of caste-based taboos. So he's quite radical, although of course this is different from the radicalism that you will find in lower caste and Dalit intellectuals of the period, because this is an upper caste Hindu who's doing this project. But the research of people like Mark Juggensmeyer, who's worked on the Adhar movement in Punjab, and Ram Narayan Rawat, who's worked on the Chamars of UP, and Nandini Guptu, who's also worked on UP, the Shudra poor in UP. They have all shown that the Arya Samaj did have actually an effect on, the educated leaders from these castes were coming out of the Arya Samaj. And then they kind of really do become these new leaders who are much more radical and form these, more radical and even politically separatist organizations. Not separatist in the sense of a separate nation, but like people who are demanding separate political representation, separate electorates. These figures, a lot of them are coming from the Arya Samaj. So, yeah, I think one needs to also kind of, acknowledge the fact that there is something going on which is within the bounds of also this upper caste project. Some radicalism is happening, which does have some meaning also. And then you'd asked about
his trip to the US.
Yeah, the caste and color question, right? His travel. So yeah, when he's traveling, he travels a lot to England. He's meeting people like Sydney and Beatrice Webb, Keir Hardie, Ramsay MacDonald. He's exchanging letters with Ramsay MacDonald. So a lot of Labour socialist politicians. George Bernard Shaw he meets. In America, he's very kind of a lot in touch with Walter Lippmann, the progressive journalist, and W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, Oswald Willard. So these are all African American educationists and in some way civil rights activists. And he's really also traveling to the American South and witnessing Jim Crow racism. And he watches this, The Birth of the Nation, which is this, very white supremacist movie that has come out. And he's really shocked by the frenzy of racism that he witnesses. And the two comparisons that he's making is really between whites and blacks in America and Britons and Indians, how they are treated. So that racial relation he compares, and then the upper caste, lower caste. So he is really making that, along with a lot of other people who have in the 20th century and till today make this connection between, how African Americans are treated by whites in America and how upper caste treat lower caste or Dalits here. He's making that comparison. So, yeah, I mean, a very interesting kind of reading of American history and kind of relating it to what's happening in Indian society.
So, Birth of the Nation was. Did he borrow any ideas from Ku Klux Klan? Because Ku Klux Klan at that point of time was a large, prominent organization with a lot of American politicians, mayors, senators, etc. Was there anything else? Because I could not find anything about it.
No, so this movie that he watches, which is The Birth of the
Ku Klux
Nation.
Klan production.
So he mentions the Ku Klux Klansmen, he calls them, and he's like just shocked. And he really sees this as some really disgusting brutality. And his friendship with people like W.E.B. Du Bois, I think here is having an effect. So he's more on that side of kind of more sympathy with African Americans and really seeing this white supremacy in really shocked terms. Yeah.
Okay. My last question to you, we already have questions for you on the chat box.
Yes.
It's very hard because there is a lot of ground to cover, but I'm going to speak to that one prominent person who a lot of people think that Bhagat Singh died to avenge Lala Lajpat Rai. It might be true in part, but the backstory that also comes out from your book, Bhagat Singh studies in National College. Bhagat Singh had known Lala Lajpat Rai because you just pointed out his uncle and Lala Lajpat Rai were deported together to Burma. But Bhagat Singh really disengages with Lala Lajpat Rai prior to the Simon Commission related demonstrations, etc., that are happening, because Lala Lajpat Rai has gone fully and completely onto the Hindu Mahasabha side. So tell us a little bit about this disagreement between two iconic leaders of Punjab.
I wish I'd actually gotten more time to go into their ideas, and the comparison would have actually been very, very nice. That can be another intellectual history that one can do. But I went into it very briefly. But yes, similar backgrounds, associations with the Arya Samaj. Bhagat Singh was, as you said, educated in the National College, and also was inspired. One historian has talked about how Lajpat Rai's library was a great inspiration for Bhagat Singh. So the anti-colonial radicalism that Bhagat Singh has is also coming from his readings of books in Lajpat Rai's library. But by the 1920s, there is a stark difference between their politics. Bhagat Singh is organizing inter-community dinners. Hindu, Muslim, Sikhs are being organized, and there are these inter-community dinners that he's organized as part of the Naujawan Sabha.
Yeah.
And Lajpat Rai is organizing Hindu Sangathan. And Bhagat Singh apparently distributes this pamphlet called The Lost Leader or Lupt Neta. And this is his critique of this kind of, Hindu communal politics, which Bhagat Singh really does not like. For him, it's about the revolution and the kind of inter-community, cross-communal solidarity for the sake of a social justice revolution, which is Lajpat Rai is just doing some completely different kind of politics by now. So very strong disagreement with Lajpat Rai, who is by now a very kind of admired and strong, anti-colonial giant figure, stalwart. But then when he dies, and that's also what's interesting, someone who's inspired now by Marxism and Marx and Lenin, and is an atheist, is avenging the death of someone that he really disagrees with. But also because Lajpat Rai is that stalwart of anti-colonialism, and his services to that cause, despite any other causes that he may have turned to, is still recognized by someone like Bhagat Singh.
Right. Yeah. It has been a fascinating conversation. It's been a great conversation. We covered most of the book, not all of the book, but that just remains for us to have a second second round of conversation whenever you have some time.
Yes, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for your close reading of the book and for all the questions. And I'm sorry, sometimes I was a little slow because I'm still a bit jet lagged and I didn't sleep properly last night. So
No, it's absolutely
you can
fine.
blame it all on that.
No, absolutely fine.